in my personal opinion, it is pretty darn rare that an appraiser employer can legally and ethically classify one of their workers as an independent contractor.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
And welcome to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out on the podcast treadmill once again. You know, I'm a simple man. I really am. Ask my wife. I like things simplified. I like things easy to understand. And that's what this podcast is going to be today. We're going to make things very, very simple on a topic that I cannot believe I have never talked about here on this podcast. Now, I might have alluded to it, but here we are 900 plus episodes in, and I have never talked about the difference between employees and independent contractors. W-2 versus W-9. It is a topic that we talk about all the time in my private coaching, all the time in my mastermind group, all the time on the All-Star group. And we've never talked about it here, but we're going to today. Hang tight. First, want to remind you that we're sponsored by a great company called Alamode. Of course, Alamode is, well, it's the software that leads the nation, leads the world in report writing for residential appraisers. And there's a reason for that. Well, there's lots of reasons for it. Check it out yourself. Go to alamode.com, or you can call them at 800-ALAMODE. Of course, OREP Insurance is the insurance that I use, and you should be as well for my E&O. And for your E&O, it's orep.org. That's OREP.org. All right, folks, we're going to talk today about a question that I get frequently. And sometimes it doesn't even come as a question. Sometimes it just comes as an assumption. When I say that, I mean, there are often times that I'm in a private coaching session and we're talking about hiring and we're talking about bringing somebody on board, whether that be a trainee, another appraiser, an office manager, an assistant, and sometimes there's just assumptions made about the way things work and the way things go, and we have to sometimes pause and say, well, hold on just a second. Let's talk through this. Let's break this down just a little bit. Okay. Let's talk today about the difference between an independent contractor and an employee. Okay, so I'm going to use a couple of different terms today, and I want to make sure that I define them up front so that we don't get confused. Okay, I might use the term W-2. W-4 and W-2 are connected. Okay, W-4 is the form that you fill out when you are employed, and W-2 is the form that you get usually in January from your employer that basically says, here's the taxes that you owe, here's the taxes that we've paid. It's the form that you take to H&R Block to get your taxes done as an employee, okay? So W-2, W-4, we're going to be using those terms probably interchangeably, okay? But it refers to specifically as an employee, an actual legally, when you say employee of the company, right? We're talking about a W-2, W-4 employee. So if you hear the term W-2, W-4, or employee today, they all refer to the same type of individual. Okay, the same type of work, the same type of employment. All right. The other three terms that I might use are W-9. That is the form that you fill out as an independent contractor. Okay, you're used to doing it because you fill it out often with AMCs. Often they employ you as independent contractors. Therefore, they send you a W-9 for you to fill out and send back to them. 1099 is the form that they send you in January that basically says you made this much money, and you take that form, not to H&R Block typically because you're a business, but you might take that to your accountant to get your taxes done. And then independent contractor. Okay, so W-9, 1099, independent contractor, all referring to the same type of employment, type of individual, and that is the independent contractor. This is someone who is not employed directly with the company. Okay, now you might do a lot of work for that company, but you are not employed directly with that company. This is super important to separate the two, because the topic on the table today is, what is the difference between an employee and an independent contractor? What is the difference between a W-2 and a W-9, or a W-4 and a W-9? Okay, so again, making it very simple, W-2, W-4, let me say it again. W-4, W-2, employee, all the same thing. W-9, 1099, independent contractor, all the same thing. Now, for the most part, I'm just going to refer to them as employees or independent contractors as we go throughout. Now, it's super, super important to make sure that you understand the difference. And we're talking from an employer perspective today. Meaning, I'm talking to you business owners as you employ other individuals. Now, this is super important as an employee as well, that you make sure that you understand what's going on. I'll share with you a quick example. My son, who is 18 going on 19, just got employed on a ranch here in Idaho. And this was a topic. One of the things I asked him is, are you an independent contractor or an employee? Well, of course, he had never experienced that world before. And so we talked through what that looks like. And he talked to his employer. And I won't go into the details, but it was a thing, right? And it's a thing because it's super important that you make sure that you're classified properly as an employee, but probably even more important that you understand how you classify those that you employ. And by the way, a hat tip rather, to Steve Varga, who is a long-term listener. I hope he doesn't mind me shouting him out, who reaches out to me frequently and says, hey, I've got a topic that you probably might want to consider. And this was his idea. And honestly, when he sent me the email, I'm like, yeah, we've covered that 1,000 times. And then I started looking and searching my podcast and realized we've never done this topic before. It blows my mind that we have not done this topic before. And it's because I talk about it so frequently when it comes to coaching that I just thought that I had done it here on the podcast as well. Okay. So to establish the base, I want to make sure that we understand as employers the legal and other ramifications of misclassifying those individuals that we hire. This, by the way, is becoming more and more important, and here's why. The IRS and others are cracking down extensively on this type of thing. You heard it right. Honestly, the IRS is tired of missing out on revenue, okay? And so they have been directed by their higher-ups to make sure that they are cracking down on these types of things and going after companies, businesses, even small businesses. Some of us think we're immune. Well, I'm not a big enough business. They're not going to come after me. Oh, yes, they are, and they are. I have on several occasions over this last year, two that I can remember, that I did some private coaching with individuals who had received letters from authorities who are going after them because they believe that they are mischaracterizing their employees in their appraisal practices. Okay, there are all kinds of ramifications, both from the IRS, from the FLSA. By the way, that stands for the Fair Labor Standards Act. That's basically the federal labor laws and state labor laws. And the funny thing about this today is you have to be worried about not just the federal laws, and anybody can go and Google, right, the type of tests, and we're going to go into those that the IRS uses to determine whether someone is an employee or an independent contractor. But you also have to go to each state that you employ from, because typically the labor laws refer to the individual where they reside. For example, I have, over the last couple of years, employed individuals in several states, including Minnesota and South Carolina and Kentucky and Florida and you name it, right? California. Across the nation, I have employed individuals to be a part of my company, and I needed to be worried about labor laws in their particular zone where they reside, their state, right? Rather than just my state, the state of Idaho. And so as you employ individuals and we become more of a global society, and through the internet and great things like Zoom, we're able to work from home from wherever we are, we need to be worried about these labor laws across the country, okay? And we need to make sure that we understand how to proper classify individuals, because it has to do with the amount of, follow the money, right? Has to do with the amount of money that the IRS receives and other things as well. There's other things that you need to be concerned about. For example, you need to be concerned about liability. Okay, let me give you an example. If you classify somebody as an independent contractor and they go out and perform an appraisal for your company, and they fall off their ladder and hurt somebody or hurt themselves, who's liable for that? These are important things to remember, because we're talking thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills, right? This is a big deal. And if you think that it's not a big deal, that hey, I'm looking around, I'm seeing what my peers are doing, and I'm just going to, follow suit and just do what they do. Well, remember, when you follow the crowd, you get what the crowd gets, right? And what is the crowd getting? And that's a question I think that we should answer for ourselves before we make this determination. So you really need to remember the potential legal and financial risks associated with misclassifying workers. And by the way, I see it all the time. Now, I want to state up front, before we dig into the details here, that I am not a lawyer. I am not an accountant, right? I'm not a CPA. I'm just a guy with a microphone. Now, I've done my research, and I think I've got a pretty good handle on this type of thing, but please get your own lawyer. Please don't hire somebody on a whim. Please don't go to ChatGPT and put in, the difference between an employer and or an employee and an independent contractor, and then lick your finger and stick it in the air and decide. Okay. I'm going to give you some general advice today, and I'm going to repeat that again. I'm going to give you some focus on the general advice today. How you actually go through and follow or not follow this advice is completely up to you. But I think it is super important that you make sure that you classify properly. I also want to define up front that we're talking about all employees, right? Now, for an appraisal company, you might be thinking trainees. I'm going to hire and train a trainee. And this is probably where it comes up most, is how do I classify my trainee, right? How do I pay my trainee? How do I pay taxes? How do I classify? What paperwork do they need to fill out? Okay. But we're talking about maybe hiring other appraisers. We're talking about assistants. We're talking about office managers. We're talking about anybody that your company pays for work that they perform on behalf of your company. Okay, let's set the stage and simply say it's important that you get this right. Here's the problem. Right up front, we're just going to say there is not a definitive answer to this question. Okay, and that's the concern. That's the problem. Yes, there's all kinds of ramifications if you get it wrong, but there's no definitive answer as to what is right and what is wrong. Now, I think it is pretty clear, in my opinion, but all I can say to you is, and by the way, I'm not speaking to each of your states. Every state has their own definitions you've got to worry about, and and you also have to worry, of course, about the federal level and the IRS level. Okay, so let's just talk on the federal level for just a moment. But just remember that you need to figure it out for yourself, not just in the state that you reside, but the state that you are hiring from. If somebody you are hiring lives in South Carolina, you need to be aware of the labor laws in South Carolina and make sure that you do it correctly, okay? The IRS basically breaks this down into two umbrellas, okay, two tests, if you will. And then they break each of those tests down into smaller tests that you simply, and by test, I mean, you have to just ask yourself, how will I perform in this particular way, okay? And again, the question we are trying to answer is, and again, I'm a simple person, let's make it very simple. I'm hiring somebody. Let's say I'm hiring John, the trainee, okay? John is going to be my new trainee, and I'm going to ask myself as an employer, should I classify John as an employee? Meaning, should I have him fill out a W-4? Or should I classify John as an independent contractor? Meaning, should I have him fill out a W-9? The IRS, again, breaks it down into two tests. They call them, number one, the control test, and number two, the economic realities test. With each of those, there are subtests or subsections that you need to be control of, or that you need to be aware of. Let's talk first about number one, the control test. What does that mean? It basically is a test that looks at the degree of control that the employer has over the worker. Okay. Now, don't get all fancy pants about the word control. Okay. We're not talking about handcuffs here, but we're talking about what the expectations are of an employee from an employer. Okay, this is the control test. For example, the first subsection under the control test is what's called the behavioral control. And it basically says, what does the employer control over the worker regarding how they behave? Okay, this includes instructions on where to work. Okay, what tools that they have to use. Like if you determine you have to use a laser measurer, for example, that might go to the behavioral control section of this type of thing. What order do you do certain things? The sequence of the tasks that you complete. Okay, that's the behavioral control. How much do you have a say over that individual and how and what they do in the job? Okay, then there's the financial control side. Does the worker have a significant financial investment in their own tools, their own equipment, their own facilities? Okay. Are they reimbursed for expenses, or do they have a chance of a profit or loss based on their work? Meaning, if they go out and buy their own laser measurer, right, there's no guarantee that that's going to pay off, right? Because there's no guarantee of the work that's going to come to them. Okay, so that's the financial control that an employer might have over that individual. Okay, in other words, some goes to some equipment and some facilities, but we're going to talk about that in just a little bit under economics as well. Okay, and then the last subsection of the control test is the type of relationships. So, is there a written contract specifying the worker's status? Okay, in other words, do you have a contract that says whether or not they are an employee or a contractor? This is super, super important. This gets into the legal ramifications. And I always, when I'm coaching and we're going through this, I always recommend that you have a written contract. Whether you decide to go with an independent contractor or an employee relationship, you need to have a written contract spelling it out so that there's no doubt on either side. Okay, I will just give you a little hint on the little story that I told you earlier. My son has no written contract. Okay, I, as his father, am recommending that he be strong about that and require that, but you know, to each their own. All right, second umbrella is the economics reality test. What does this mean? This is basically how the money happens between the worker and the employee. Okay, or the worker and the employer rather. The subtests, the number one is the investment in facilities and equipment. Okay, basically, let's put it in layman's terms. Does the worker invest in his or her own equipment and workspace? In other words, is that person required to come to an office? Do you provide the computer, the server, the software, all of this stuff, right? Are you providing them with the tools that they need to do the job, the facility, the place to work? Okay, that's a big one. Opportunity for profit and loss. Can the worker make a profit or incur a loss based on their decisions, their opinions, their actions when performing the work. Okay. How much control does the employer have over the profit loss for the individual employee? Okay. How much is that, the number three, how much is that worker integrated into the employer's business? The integration of them into the business. Is the work performed by the worker integral to the employer's core business? In other words, another way to put this is this a key employee? Okay. In other words, what would your business do without this person? If this person walked or got hit by a bus, heaven forbid, how would your economic situation, your business situation, your relationships with your clients be affected? Okay. That's a big one. It sounds like a small one, but it's a big one. Think about this for just a second. Okay. If this person is a key employee, basically what I'm saying is the IRS says, probably not an independent contractor in that case. Okay. And then of course the method of payment. Now listen to this one very, very closely, because this is super important. This to me is one of those realities that kind of just smacks you up alongside the face. Okay. Is the worker paid a regular salary? Okay. That is key. I know it sounds silly. Of course they're paid a regular salary, Dustin. They're paid every 2 weeks. Okay. If they're paid every 2 weeks like clockwork, there's a pretty good chance that they're not an independent contractor, regardless of the way that you decide. And by the way, I should have said this up front, right? You can choose as an employer to classify them any way you want. Just know that there is a chance of an IRS audit, or of a labor department audit, or a state level audit. Both federal and state you're concerned about. And folks, I am telling you, again, I have coached 2 individuals this last year who are in one of these audits at this point. Both of them are on a state level. It's a labor department state level audit. Okay. I've also heard rumor that the IRS is cracking down because, again, they don't like the fact that across the country, there's lots of quote unquote independent contractors that, I mean, when you really look at these realities tests, right, probably should not be classified as such. Okay. Now I want to get into the details, the specifics of an appraisal office, and I'm going to give you my opinion. Okay. Today, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to give you my opinion about where you as an employer probably should go. You probably can already know what that opinion is based on how I've said things up, Brett. But we'll do that when we get back from the break. First, I want to pause and remind you that we're sponsored by a great company, A la Mode. A la Mode, of course, is the software that leads the nation, leads the world, because of so many built-in tools. One of the great things about A la Mode is their online training. I have been online at alamode.com a lot lately because I am training and helping appraisers to become better. And rather than reinvent the wheel, I just send them to A la Mode and say, go to their training, find out how to sketch, find out how to fill in the blank. There is a video, probably by Joel Baker, right, out there from A la Mode showing you step by step. And these are great videos showing you how to use their product. There are so many of these training videos. If you're overwhelmed by learning a new software, don't be, because A la Mode makes it simple. alamode.com or 800 A la Mode. Speaking of training and benefits, one of the awesome things about OREP insurance, okay, now it's E&O, right? Not very sexy. Nobody thinks, oh, E&O, I can't wait to study E&O. I can't wait to decide my E&O. But I'll tell you what makes it sexy, and that is the benefits that come with OREP insurance. I mean, we're talking free CE. Yeah, this is stuff that actually counts towards your license, folks, for free. How much did you pay last year for your continuing education? How about zero when you use OREP insurance? OREP.org. Again, it's OREP.org. Welcome back to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out on the podcast treadmill today. Getting a little steps in as we talk today about the difference between an independent contractor and an employee. I laid out before the break some of the tests that the IRS utilizes. Okay. One of the other things that goes to that test is the amount of training that is required. Basically, let me give you an analogy. Okay. A great way to think about this is an employee is basically somebody who is on a regular basis being trained by, being directed by, okay, being quote unquote, they use the word controlled by the employer. Okay, meaning they're told where to go and what to wear and how to show up and when to show up and how they're paid and everything else, right? It's the standard thing that you think about when you think about an employee. An independent contractor could be compared to a plumber that comes to your house to fix a broken toilet. Okay. You don't have control over that individual. They have their own business line. They have their own business name. They work for other people. This is very key, right? Very key. They have their own tools and they have their own training, right? They don't come to your house and you say, okay, let me show you how to fix this toilet so that you can fix the toilet for me. Okay, that would be silly. There is no doubt at all if you hire a plumber multiple times in a year and you get over that $600 threshold, right? That $600 threshold is basically the threshold where you need to provide a 1099, at least according to the IRS. So let's say you have a plumber come out 3 times. The same plumber comes out 3 times to your house or your business, right? Officially, you should give them a 1099 and they should have filled out a W-9. Is that always going to happen? I don't know. Again, I'm not going to get into the details, but the point is this. There is no doubt in anybody's mind that that plumber is an independent contractor. They're not in any way controlled by you. They're not in any way trained by you. You did not provide the tools. They wear their own uniform. They come on their own schedule, right? All of this stuff are the same tests that you should think about when you hire individuals and consider whether or not they're going to be an employee or an independent contractor. Okay. Now, I think you understand where I'm getting with this when it comes to appraisers. Let's just talk trainees, for example. Okay. When you look at the tests that the IRS gives to determine whether or not somebody is an independent contractor or an employee, is there any doubt in your mind after I've laid this out? I mean, really, think about it for just a second. Is there any doubt at all as to whether or not these individuals should be classified as employees or independent contractors, especially if you're training them, right? You're telling them where to go. Most of the time you're providing equipment to them. You are training them. They don't come to you already knowing how to appraise. Now, is there a question when you hire somebody that's already a certified residential? Possibly, okay? I can see much more reason to say, okay, well, let's look through this. Let's see how we pay them and how we control them. Okay, now this is key, right? If you're telling them you've got to be at 123 Any Street on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock, that could be questionable, right? Now, again, I stated this up front, and I want to go back to this as we start to wrap up today. I want to go back to the point that there is not one determination as to whether or not somebody should be an employee or an independent contractor. Rather, there are a lot of gray areas, and it's kind of, I would look at it this way, it's the preponderance of evidence. I'm going to use that term, okay? Does the preponderance of evidence point to one or the other? And that's really where you need to look. Now, folks, I will tell you this, that there are some huge ramifications, both legally and financially, if you misclassify, okay? Look it up. Trust me, you do not want to be in the boat of quote unquote trying to get away with classifying somebody incorrectly. Okay, specifically classifying them as an independent contractor when really they are an employee. Now, some of you might hear at the end of the podcast say, "Well, why would you not do it right?" Well, because there's tax savings, right? Because you're not going to have to pay, for example, the employee tax, the FICA, because of the relationship, right? You don't pay FICA, you don't pay Medicare, you don't pay Social Security for your plumber. Okay. And that's really what this comes down to is some will say, well, I'm saving money by classifying them a certain way. We didn't really even talk. I mean, I alluded to it, so we kind of shadow talked, but let me just emphasize again, the non-compete side of this, right? I had a situation recently where one of my mastermind students was classifying somebody as an independent contractor. And she was a little annoyed that this independent contractor was working for somebody else or doing work on the side. And my advice and others' advice in the mastermind was they should be, right? The whole point is you're not going to control that plumber's work, right? You're not going to say you're going to be a plumber for me and me alone, right? One of the tests that the IRS is going to look at is, are they allowed to, and not just allowed to, but are they currently actively working for other clients? If they are, then there's a pretty good chance that they could be an independent contractor because they obviously have their own equipment. They obviously have their own software. They obviously make their own schedule, right? All of these things come into play when it comes to independent contractor versus employee. Now, I told you I would give you my opinion. I want to again state, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a CPA. This is just some guy, bald guy at that, with my, and by the way, I used to say bald fat guy. I'm getting a little bit skinnier. This treadmill's working, the diet's working, okay? But I'm still a bald guy with a microphone. So take it for what it's worth. Take it for what you paid for this podcast, which was $0. That's about how much this advice is worth. In my personal opinion, it is pretty darn rare that an appraiser employer can legally and ethically classify one of their workers as an independent contractor. It can be done, and I've seen it, right? But it is pretty darn rare. I would say lean on the side of caution. Now, what is the difference financially, folks? It is not that big of a deal. It really isn't. When I did the math, and it's been several years, when I did the math years ago, I think the number that stuck in my head was like 7% difference, okay? The difference between an independent contractor and the amount of pay that comes out of the employer's pocket and the amount of pay that comes out of their pocket as a regular W-2, W-4 employee was about 7.5%. I'm telling you, folks, the benefit that you get and the ability to sleep well at night, right? To be able to sleep in your bed knowing that you're not cutting corners, knowing that you're not in danger of getting an audit and getting a financial penalty. To me, it's worth, and honestly, forget that for just a second. Let's put that aside. If it wasn't for the IRS, if it wasn't for all of these other things, just the control. And again, I got to be careful about that word. We live in a world where, human trafficking is a thing. I'm not going there, right? But the amount of, what's a better word? Control, the amount of say that you have as an employer over your employees, to me, is huge. To me, it makes all the difference in the world. The fact that you can say you cannot work for anybody else in this particular type of work in this area, that you can have a non-compete alone is worth it to me. So folks, if you have been doing it wrong, if you listen to this podcast and go, oh, shoot, I'm in trouble. I've not been doing this right. Listen to Dustin's podcast. And honestly, when he went through those tests, there's no way I meet that level. Folks, it's never too late to make a change. I would do it through a lawyer. I would do it through a contract. I would do it through writing. Okay. But there's nothing wrong. I can't say what the IRS will or won't do, okay? But I can tell you this, they're going to be less inclined to go after somebody who corrected the record than somebody who continues to try to get away with something that they probably shouldn't be based on the tests that we outlined. Thank you for joining me today, folks. It has been wonderful. I know we went a little bit long today, but I think this was an important topic that comes up frequently that, again, I can't believe we have not done yet. Thank you, Steve, for the advice, and thank you all for listening. If you have any topics that you would like to hear, feel free to email me, thecoach@theappraisercoach.com. Go create some value.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.